only words I have now is thank you, arigato, because this giving a prize is just to honor the institution that gives the prize. And it is a great honor for me to be here and to receive this distinction that essentially is for my colleagues and my collaborators, my students. I just mentioned the collaborations I had with along the years with Professor Irikura, and more recently, at the time, Iwata Sensei, and more recently with Professor Kawase, Professor Matsushima, and all the students that are working together. I remember in this little booklet there are some references to works done with Shinaoi, and also with some other people from DPRI, the recent students. Thank you very much. Today I'm going to make I have to make a very difficult selection of recent works and write this paper you have in mind. This paper I wrote with great pleasure under big pressure just a few days before coming here. And then I'm going to talk about ambient vibrations in seismology and earthquake engineering. I couldn't cover the subject. This is a wide subject, and this is only an overview that may give you an idea of some of the things that are behind this. In this outline, I will make a small presentation, discuss a little bit how multiple scattering gives place to diffuse fields ideas, and how green functions retrieval is the consequences of all this. And the thread of my presentation, and also of the booklet you have in your hands, is the equipartition of energy and how it applies in dynamic elasticity. Some experimental verifications in very careful experiments done at the beginning of the century give us confidence that this is a very interesting field. I present some results of the correlation representation theorem and present but just a few of the Green's function from average of correlations. Preliminary results of dispersion in alluvial basins and how to relate energy densities with green function. So some amazing results regarding the partition of energy that are deterministic results that arise from this theory. And so the theory is now being established, and I try to make some conclusions on this. I mentioned in this in the introduction of the paper that we see in the last decade, or maybe 15 years if you want, a spectacular emergence of these ideas of how to use information from noise that before was considered useless and a kind of nuisance, and now is a very powerful tool for imaging the Earth at many different scales. There are an explosion. This is a kind of revolution in science to see how a lot of data that was accumulated in the past is giving new results about the structure of the Earth. But in seismology, the applications are much varied. They include studies of seismicity in the sun. Just using data from satellites, you can imagine and make synthetic seismograms in the surface of the sun. But also these advances permeate to earthquake engineering, and now the side effects are, after the works of Nakamura and Nogoshi and Igarashi first in the 70s, but the Nakamura paper gave a kind of boom to the studies of side effects using a single station. This makes popular the method, but it was no theory, and during many years, people were debating about the origin of these effects. I will mention a little bit about this. So, when we see this seismogram, this is a seismogram recorded in Mexico, sorry. And if we plot the energy, so essentially the envelope of the squares of these quantities, you can see at the beginning the theoretical predictions of decay corresponds to single bounces. While when you have many interactions of waves with the Earth, with all the heterogeneities, we see that the energy, the waves arriving from everywhere. So the energy decays essentially like a diffusion process with exponential decay. The theory, the adequate theory to study this is a very complicated theory, but this is radiative transfer theory. It was actually, well, this corresponds to the origin of noise, which resembles, is similar to the coda waves I presented before, but this shows that the different sources of noise may be generating waves that sample the Earth and produce interesting, we can extract properties of the medium just by studying these vibrations. Here you have the storms, the storms, traffic, metro or trains, the ocean, the machinery, and people, even people dancing generate noise. So this, the theory I mentioned, the radiative transfer, was originated in astrophysics. I guess that Keitiaki was an educated man, and he was aware of developments in the field. And when he and Rushan Wu, Yewa Sheng, Haruo Sato, Kevin Mayeda, and others, Michel Campillo notably, Margeran and others, I think the application of these ideas to seismology were led by Professor Aki, and now we can have a very important reference like the books of Sato and Feller, now in the second edition already, and the compilation of the Mosca, Sato and Feller. Some of the predictions of this theory say that the energy in 2D medium is related with the velocities of P waves and S waves. And in three-dimensional medium, the energy will have this distribution. This is a consequence of the theorem of equipartition of energy. I skip some mathematical derivations, but this is a very interesting subject. And suggesting that multiple scattering, we have illumination from everywhere, will give to some equilibration of the energy and the energy equipartition that is shared by the different modes or the different states of the system. These predictions are verified in this, I put from this paper I did with Michel Campillo, in which we assume waves coming from everywhere, propagating in all directions, with the proper polarizations, with proper directions, and so on. And it was amazing that, it's confusing, you're right. It was amazing that if we have, this is an assumption we have, that the density of P waves multiplied by the cube of the velocity of P waves and the spectral density of SV waves by the cube of the velocity of S waves must be equal to guarantee the perfect retrieval of the Green function. So this corresponds to the correlations in between two positions in the field, in vector in direction I, vector in direction J. This is complex conjugate, and this is average. And these are just the technical issues like energy of S waves and so on. But this is the Green function. This is the impulsive response of the medium. And this can be written in this way. we gather the energy of S waves with the two polarizations. We have the two here, and then we have this ratio. And this made me believe in the equipartition. I never studied before equipartition, but this say, oh, I believe in that. So one of the consequences, little attention is given to these results, but one interesting fact is that equipartition allows to express the energy density in the given medium, for instance, a full space, elastic space. You can write in terms of the energy associated to P waves, to SH waves, and SV waves. In terms of R is the ratio of P to S velocity. So it is the P waves share a very small part of the available energy, while the S waves take a big part. This was hypothesized in the 70s by Professor Aki as a consequence of his analysis of seismograms. What it is less known is that energy is also distributed in degrees of freedom, in the directions of motion. In a homogeneous medium, we may imagine that energy will go in each direction, having 1/3 of the available energy. And it comes out that this is 1/3 of the available energy can be distributed for P waves as 1/3 as well, but for SH and SV, this sounds like a perfect relationship, just ratios that are general ratios. So this shows that energy can be either considered in terms of modes, propagation modes, or degrees of freedom. And the sum of these degrees of freedom will be the total energy of the system. These are very simple results. And we succeed in doing the calculations, showing that this happens in the deep full space. For each degree of freedom, we have 1/3 of the energy, of the total available energy. And also, if we consider in the deep space, the P waves and the S waves share the energy as predicted by the equations. What it is less known is how this connects to the free surface and how this connects with the emergency of Rayleigh waves. This opened the door to understanding, and understanding how that at the end the energy budget is the same. The plots were equally, and this was for me it was a kind of amazing result. We did it in 3D, in 2D, and then we repeat in 3D, and this opened the door to new thinking. For instance, you can see here the results given energy in the 3 directions, and also proportional to the imaginary part of the trace of the green tensor. So the final result, the budget, is the same, although the energy can be shared in different boxes. All these make that this is something of a statistical physics. When the field is equipartition, the contribution of all modes produce the green function. This has a lot of implications in seismology and in the recent studies of noise and coda waves. So one interesting verification made at the beginning of this century is this experimental verification made in Mexico, precisely in Mexico, by Michel Campillo, Shapiro, and others. An array was installed in Chilpancingo. It was a 50 meters aperture array, and the idea was to have this array to compute spatial derivatives of motion and to be able to separate the energy, to do some mathematical treating, and write, after several earthquakes, finally, for this event, for instance, it was possible to show that the energy shared by S and P waves in many parts of the coda share the same proportion, essentially some proportion predicted by the theory at the surface of the hard space. This was perhaps the first experimental verification of such a principle that goes over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, almost 6 orders of magnitude, the size of the energy, in which the relationship between S and P is in agreement with the prediction of the theory. So you can see here that even before the arrival of the earthquake, the energy have similar proportions, and this means that even the noise and the coda share some properties. This is thinking open the door to many applications of noise and coda waves and even earthquakes. One thing was lacking, because in the formulas we did, we have to assume the proportions for equipartition. It was nice, but it was not static. After using a representation theorem like this, it was possible to derive this formula, but now we didn't have to assume equipartition. It arises naturally, as I will see later in some formulas. So equipartition arises naturally, and it is possible that indeed to write this formula from a very formal representation theorem. And it works even for heterogeneous media, anisotropic. So it's quite a general thing. One application of this, and then this is unpublished results, that something we try to do is tomography in the Valley of Mexico, in which we use earthquakes, just stimulated by the recent findings of Professor Kawase and some others, even Victor Salinas, who did measurements in Mexico City. We think we can extract information from the earthquakes recorded in the Mexico City area to get a tomography map of surface waves. Now, so far we have numerical validations that suggest that the thing is possible. For instance, we are generating for an alluvial basin, very soft alluvial basin, we are getting the green function between these two stations by illumination using plane waves and Rayleigh waves, or using sources and multiple scattering, and even the theoretical part. So the results are quite good, and shows that the three approaches converge. We're ready to do the real calculations and try to show that what we are doing in theoretical models like this or like this will be reproduced in the real valley. But then, when we realize that when we do the autocorrelation at the source, this is scaled with the energy, with the local energy, and this is related with the imaginary part of green function. But the green function typically is singular at the source, but when we deal in Fourier analysis with the imaginary part, it comes out that it is healthy and is proportional to the energy transmitted to the medium by a unique harmonic force. This is a very interesting result that can be verified from the representation theorem. If we use the representation theorem we present before and specialize for a sphere, then it comes out that the green function can be constructed by an integral, by a cocktail of plane waves, P waves, and shear waves that are modulated by the equipartition theory. So this machinery gives a new formula or a new representation of green function. But even in all the stock solutions, 1849 solution, after doing Fourier analysis, it is possible to write down this formula. And we see that even a single formula, a single force, already have the equipartition of energy in a single force solution. So this allows us that the consequence of the energy, and we can relate the energy with green function and put the energy in degrees of freedom, and also put the energy in terms of P waves, S waves, and surface waves, and give some use to directional energy densities. With this and other things, we can just find the solutions that were published in the 50s by Miller and Purcey. For instance, the proportions of energy that leaves a given point in terms of the proportion of energy. But then, using diffuse field concepts, Weber did it in 85 and obtained the same results. And also, it is remarkable to note that for the horizontal load, neither Chow or neither Cherry were able to compute these coefficients, but Weber did in 1985. So the best way to introduce energy into the medium will be the horizontal load, which produces some 60% of the energy is injected into the medium. We noticed this in a paper we wrote together in 2011 to notice this connection between deterministic solutions and the diffuse field theory. These are the way the energy is distributed in the interior of the soil, suggesting some interesting technological applications, like Goto results for a disk, probably for a shearing disk can be much improved. But one of the interesting applications of noise is, and the H over V, which is the emerging results of this theory, we notice that the predominant period of a given site will give, in terms of the thickness, 4 times the thickness and the shear wave velocity. This will produce, the side effects are responsible for amplification and increase of duration, and people have, since the early, in the 70s or maybe in the 80s, with Nakamura's approach, learning that H over V gives the fundamental period of the soil. But the goal will be to obtain the velocity distribution with depth in order to compute the response, to compute the side effects. But this may be very expensive to do borings or to do, so people have relied on this type of techniques. And precisely, Arai and Tokimatsu proposed in the early, more than 10 years ago, a formula that relates the energy densities at the surface with horizontal energy densities with the vertical one, and estimate H over V in this way. This is data-oriented, and Arai and Tokimatsu did very nice work. They were able to invert in terms of the characteristical peaks. But using this theory I mentioned before, we are now confident and relate measurements in the field with system properties in terms of the green function. So we can make our formula, and we apply it for 3D problems in the Geophysical Journal International, and with Professor Kawase, this was pioneer for problems in which there is predominance of body waves. And so this formula is giving results that are amazing for, if you consider the physical properties of this. In 3D, for instance, you can see that the imaginary part of green function is nothing like a very theoretical thing. It's just a kind of giving results that are essentially related with the resonances of the system, the resonance of shear waves, while the vertical motion is less sensitive to this because of the emergency of Rayleigh waves. So this gives a peak, and then it is relatively very smooth. So understanding these properties will allow to do some other things. Now it's open to research. For instance, the Texcoco experiment, now we have this improved version of the data, and we are just discovering that it's very important the way you treat the data, how to eliminate artifacts or some other things. So, and according to the results by Benson, we just reprocess the data, and we are confident that this behavior in the data in Texcoco, and this is what is predicted by the theory, by a single layer. We have to refine this to closer observations with theory, but we are confident this is a 3D effect. But for a layer media, the computation of green function is just a matter of doing some math, and then it is possible to write the imaginary part of green function in terms of integrals on the radial wave number domain. So there are integrals like this, and even simpler, because if r equals 0, this parenthesis will be 1. Also this will be 1 because this is 1 and this will be 0. And then we have to integrate these formulas. And these formulas were first written by Hartrider in the 60s, essentially using Haskell method. But these formulas, then we can compute them, but we discover, and some of our students are discovering this is very small step. We have to do very fine integration. But thanks to this gentleman, Louis-Augustin Cauchy, in the middle of the 19th century, beyond developing the theory of elasticity, he also developed the theory of residual integration in the imaginary plane. And such our integrals, these integrals can be computed in terms of the contribution of the residuals at the poles, plus another integrals along the branch lines. So this is really mathematical, a kind of tricky mathematical approach, but it's come up that this allows to speed inversion. This is a contribution by our colleague in Spain, Antonio García Jerez, who put forward these expressions, and we were able to use it to compute H over V. In particular, the integrals of the imaginary part of green functions, when we put a little damping just to allow seeing the peaks, and the peaks are related with at this particular frequency, f 5 hertz here, corresponds to the zeros, to the dispersion values for lobe and Rayleigh waves. So these peaks are related to these poles. So if we have an engine to compute the dispersion curves, then we can go to the poles and compute the residuals, then do some integration, small integration here, and we are done. So this is, for instance, this allows to do H over V and schematically understand the contribution of body, lobe, and Rayleigh waves to the horizontal motion and to the vertical motion. We can eventually assume the contribution of different parts and link the different theories. For instance, for the direct problem, we can obtain H over V a la carte. I mean, depending on which wave you want them to use to compute H over V. And for instance, these links, you have here the full theory. And the first mode is just is presented here. But if we make the calculations just as it is suggested in the theory by Kawase et al., we can see the emergency of the higher modes. Of course, we can see higher modes if we just do the right theoretical computation. So this links the theory, because using this approach we can separate the different contributions and waves. Here we have, for instance, only the surface waves in red, which is very similar to the full wave, and the contribution of body waves here, body waves in blue. But this then allows us to do the inverse problem just computing the misfit using simulated annealing and combination of simulated annealing with genetic algorithm that is done here by Fumiaki, Nagashima, and others, and just using the heuristic algorithms in which there are a bunch of models that are iterated. Of course, if we can compute the direct problem in a very fast way, then we open the door to have better inversion. For instance, some simulations done by Pepe Piña, by José Piña in his master thesis, allows to get to see some of the inversion results of H over V, and here we can see that both the H over V and the imaginary part of green function converge after several iterations. This has been applied for inverting the velocity structure in the city of Almería. And in this case, some sort of joint inversion between H over V and the dispersion curve for a small array, a SPAC array with 5 vertex, 5 stations without center station, but a red 400 meters radius. You get this dispersion curve for the fundamental mode, and the cooperative inversion allowed to do this type of velocity structure at this place. One important fact is that H over V can be extended to irregular media, and then just to test the regular media, Matsushima and others did some validation with the spectral elements, a high precision method, in which, and then it was possible to compute. It was possible to compute the theoretical H over V and the theoretical imaginary part of green function with the spectral elements, having an excellent agreement, and be able to study data recorded here at UJI, comparing what the predictions of the theory for a given site, for instance, this one, and this is a simple model for the Obaku fault, and you see what one D theory gives, and the results are 2D basin. The results of observations give a larger difference, but still the problem needs to be refined to see if we need some more precise characterization of the properties or some other things in order to match what it is observed in the field. This was published recently in BSSA by Matsushima et al., and some extended measurements are suggesting that the pattern is robust and that there is need to understand this. I don't have the results yet, but we are applying this to some other places in which we have lateral irregularity. I want to conclude in saying that the conducting thread of this talk is the principle of equipartition of energy, allows characterization of diffuse fields, and in seismology, a key issue is multiple scattering. So multiple scattering gets the equilibration of energy. We re-examined the properties of equipartition in full space and presented some of the experimental verifications. Some colleagues at Tohoku are doing also interesting measurements in boreholes to verify this. The retrieval of green function is extended also to earthquakes, not only noise or coda, but also to earthquakes, and we propose the concept of generalized diffuse fields. And we are studying how to get deterministic green functions with equipartition cocktails of waves. Directional energy densities are obtained from autocorrelation averages, and we have very interesting views of deterministic partition of energy. We are just seeing that this works. The H over V ratios are in the generality of circumstances. For seismic noise, the fast calculations allow inversion. For incoming body waves, it's already done fast calculation allowed for inversion. The effects with depth, the perspective is to do the fast calculation. Now, this is want to be fast. This is slow calculation. And we see just very encouraging results of the effects in the presence of lateral irregularities. This is possible to apply these ideas to the study of, for instance, the sun pyramid in Teotihuacan. We don't have results yet, but and also of air dams. I think this concept will keep us very surprised looking at the new applications.